the relational consequences of avoidance. Here's a troubling paradox. Thousands of empirical studies on avoidant attachment have been published worldwide over the past 40 years. We now know, with remarkable scientific precision, how avoidance develops, how it functions neurologically, how it manifests behaviorally. And yet, one fundamental question remains strangely absent from mainstream literature, and even from many specialized works. Is severe avoidance structurally compatible with the very idea of a healthy relationship? This question isn't being left out by accident. It is avoided, ironically, because its uncomfortable answer would force modern societies to acknowledge something deeply unsettling, that the hyper-individualism we celebrate, the toxic independence we glorify, the narcissism we normalize, are fundamentally incompatible with what the word relationship means etymologically: to relate, to connect, to establish interdependence. The deafening silence in research authors who write about attachment rarely cite the empirical studies that clearly reveal the structural dysfunction of severe avoidance in relationships. They prefer to soften, contextualize, or relativize. They speak of different styles, legitimate needs for space, or potential complementarity with anxious types. They encourage partners to understand, to adapt, to respect boundaries, as if the issue were simply one of mutual adjustment rather than fundamental compatibility. Why this silence? Because acknowledging the true dysfunction of avoidance would be to admit that our modern and postmodern societies are structurally ill, that we have built social, economic, and cultural environments that mass-produce individuals incapable of committing, terrified of vulnerability, allergic to reciprocity. To admit this would be to accept our collective responsibility in the current epidemic of loneliness. The necessary shift in the center of gravity. This book proposes a radical shift in the center of analytical gravity. We will not focus primarily on the subjective experience of the avoidant person, their fears, wounds, or inner life. Not because these aspects are unimportant, but because they have already been the subject of countless publications, often laced with a therapeutic leniency that borders on indulgence. Our goal is different: to analyze the very structure of avoidance and how that structure interacts, or rather, fails to interact, with the idea of a healthy relationship. What is a healthy relationship? Definitions vary, but a scientific consensus has emerged from decades of research. Gottman, 1999, Rusbolt and Van Lang, 2003, Mikulincer and Shaver, 2007. A healthy relationship is based on emotional reciprocity, a minimum of shared duties and responsibilities, the ability for mutual vulnerability, a sincere commitment to building a shared life. Severe avoidance is, by definition and structure, incompatible with all of these pillars. This isn't about degree, adjustment, or temporary personal work. It's a fundamental architectural incompatibility, like trying to build a bridge with no supporting pillars or a house without foundations. This book systematically explores that incompatibility. We will examine how each characteristic of severe avoidance, the false self, toxic independence, unilateral expectations, refusal of vulnerability, and lack of prioritization of the partner, sabotages not just one relationship or another, but the very concept of relationship itself. Or the societal endorsement of dysfunction. It is both remarkable and terrifying to observe how contemporary societies actively value the very traits that define severe avoidance. Hyper-individualism is no longer simply accepted. It is prescribed as a path to fulfillment. Postmodernism and the Reign of the Self. Though this is not a book on philosophy, it is impossible to understand the normalization of avoidance without mentioning the postmodern and post-truth shift in our societies. What occurred is a radical shift in the center of gravity. We moved from a world where concepts shaped reality to a world where the self imposes its will on reality. What does this mean, concretely? Take the idea of a healthy relationship. In a modernist framework, this concept had objective content, grounded in scientific research, emotional reciprocity, mutual vulnerability, shared commitments, and responsibilities. Relationships could be evaluated based on these criteria, independent of the partner's subjective feelings. But in a postmodern or post-truth society, this concept no longer exists. There is no longer a healthy relationship per se. There is only what works for me. What suits me becomes healthy. What doesn't becomes unhealthy, regardless of any external standard. The I becomes the central barometer, the sole judge of truth, right and wrong. The consequences are devastating for relational thinking. In this postmodern logic, there are only individual incompatibilities, never structural ones. When a relationship fails, the narcissist or avoidant who cannot sustain genuine intimacy never asks, "Is my psychological architecture compatible with the very idea of a healthy relationship, one that acknowledges the other as a subject and is based on reciprocity, with mutual duties and responsibilities?" No. The question they ask is, was this particular partner compatible with me? In this perspective, it's never their own architecture being questioned. It's always the partner's incompatibility. The structural question, am I capable of engaging in a relationship that recognizes the other as a subject, not just a function of my needs, is never asked. Instead, we hear an endless list of individual incompatibilities. They were too demanding. We had different values. I just haven't found the right person. The problem is always the other, never the underlying structure of one's relationship to others. This postmodern logic turns the other into a variable in the service of the all-powerful self. As brilliantly analyzed by Zygmunt Bauman in Liquid Love, 2003, and Eva Illouz in Why Love Hurts, 2012, contemporary capitalist societies have commodified relationships. The other becomes a product, judged by how well they meet our needs without requiring any transformation on our part. Bauman describes this liquid modernity, where relationships become disposable, fluid, devoid of lasting commitment. We consume the other as long as they provide satisfaction, then move on when emotional investment becomes too costly. Illouz shows how capitalism has colonized the intimate sphere, turning partners into products, evaluated in a relationship market by optimization criteria. Does this person maximize my well-being while minimizing constraints? Avoidance fits perfectly into this postmodern framework. The avoidant seeks a relationship where they receive relational warmth, their needs are met, without having to give in return, minimal constraints, without commitment, flexibility, liquidity, without vulnerability, self-preservation, without duties or responsibilities, no transformation of self. In other words, the avoidant wants the benefits of a relationship without its structural cost. And in a postmodern society that champions absolute autonomy, rejection of dependency, and self-primacy, this desire is not only understood, it is validated and encouraged. This is precisely why avoidance so often goes unnoticed. It aligns perfectly with the dominant values of our time. To call it out is to challenge hyper-individualism, cultural narcissism, and the commodification of intimacy. In short, to question the very foundations of postmodern society. Mainstream authors, even those writing about attachment, are generally reluctant to take on this radical critique. It's more comfortable to speak of different styles, mutual respect for needs, communication, and compromise, than to name the elephant in the room. Some psychological structures are fundamentally incompatible with the idea of a relationship. Period. This book takes on that critique. We live in societies that both produce and glorify avoidance. Until we recognize this structural reality, we will continue treating the individual symptoms, this specific relationship failed, without ever seeing the collective illness. We're raising individuals structurally incapable of commitment. A crucial clarification. Although this book deeply analyzes severe avoidance, The critique actually targets all forms of extreme hyper-individualization that render authentic connection impossible. Severe avoidance is simply the best documented manifestation of this structural incompatibility between hyper-individualism and the very concept of relationship. Other psychological structures, such as pathological narcissism, psychopathy, or certain forms of extreme emotional dependency that erase the other, present similar incompatibilities. This book focuses on avoidance because it is the most normalized and invisible pattern in contemporary society, but the structural principle applies to any system that fundamentally denies reciprocity and the recognition of the other as a subject. And most importantly, severe avoidance is not a life sentence. While the therapeutic work required is deep, long, and difficult, transformation is possible. This book does not condemn avoidance. It exposes a structural reality in the hope that such awareness becomes the starting point for real change. What this book is and is not. This book is not a manual for unconditional compassion toward avoidance, a guide on how to make it work with a severely avoidant partner, a therapeutic sugarcoating that excuses all behavior in the name of trauma, a celebration of independence or difference. This book is a rigorous structural analysis of the incompatibility between severe avoidance and healthy relationships, a clear description of the emotional, psychological, and existential consequences of avoidance for partners, a direct confrontation with the defense mechanisms, rationalizations, and denials that sustain avoidance, a call to responsibility. Understanding is not excusing, and past pain doesn't justify inflicting future suffering. This book is not gentle. It confronts. It disturbs. But that is exactly what's needed to break the cycles of denial and self-justification that keep avoidance intact. Therapeutic observation shows that severe avoidance destroys countless relationships that could have been beautiful. We witness brilliant, sensitive individuals capable of deep love locking themselves into patterns that condemn them to solitude. We also see their partners, frustrated, exhausted, convinced they are the problem, when in reality, they are simply facing a wall, one that no one helps them open. The central question. This book is structured around a question that is simple, but rarely asked directly. Can a severely avoidant person who has not done deep therapeutic work have a healthy, reciprocal, committed relationship? The answer, which we will document throughout these pages with empirical studies, clinical observation, and structural analysis is no. Not because avoidants are bad people, not because they don't deserve love, but because the very structure of severe avoidance, the false self, the allergy to vulnerability, the refusal of reciprocity, the inability to prioritize the partner, is architecturally incompatible with what a healthy relationship requires. It's like asking if a fish can fly or if a car can sail underwater. It's not about effort or intention. It's about structural limitations. Who this book is for. If you are a severely avoidant person, this book will confront you with uncomfortable truths. You will be tempted to reject it, to label it anti-avoidant, to say it doesn't understand your reality. That is your defense mechanism speaking. Have the courage to read it through. If you recognize yourself in these pages, know that awareness is the first step toward change. Severe avoidance is not irreversible, but escaping it requires deep, honest, and sustained therapeutic work. If you are the partner of an avoidant, this book will help you understand that you're not crazy, that your needs for reciprocity and commitment are legitimate, and that no amount of love, however intense, can overcome structural incompatibility. If you are a mental health professional, this book offers a structural analysis framework that complements traditional psychodynamic and behavioral approaches. It will help you avoid falling into therapeutic indulgence that normalizes avoidance under the guise of difference or respecting boundaries. If you're simply curious, this book offers an unflinching look at one of the most destructive and widespread relational dynamics of our time. Structure of the book. The book is organized into 4 parts. Part 1, The Roots of Avoidance, explores the fundamental mechanisms that create and sustain the avoidance structure: false self, toxic independence, family legacy. Part 2, Relational Manifestations, analyzes how these mechanisms show up as concrete relational behaviors, unilateral expectations, lack of prioritization, hot-cold dynamics, breadcrumbing. Part 3, Consequences, examines the impact of avoidance on partners and the relational structure itself. Part 4, Paths to Transformation, explores the necessary and difficult conditions for true evolution out of severe avoidance. A methodological note. Severe avoidance operates according to the same psychological mechanisms in men and women. Therefore, we will use the generic term, the avoidant person, throughout the book. However, some gendered differences do emerge in specific contexts, particularly in partner selection, relational frameworks, and the expression of sexuality. Where clinically relevant, these differences will be explored explicitly, supported by research and clinical observation. One final word. This book adopts a confrontational tone. It names things clearly, without sugarcoating. It is not about being anti-avoidant. It is about describing what truly happens when certain psychological structures attempt to enter into relationship. If you're looking for a book that says, everyone deserves love just as they are, or avoidants are just different, or with patience and understanding, things will work out, this is not that book. But if you're looking for an analysis rooted in empirical research and what we actually observe, beyond emotional narratives and comforting language, about what happens structurally when hyper-individualism collides with the very concept of relationship, then turn the page. The question is not whether change is possible. The question is, are you ready to face the facts?